The West Texas night was almost empty. No moon, no close stars, just a strip of highway glow on the horizon and far away, a single porch light burning over a tired farmhouse like an ember that refused to go out. Down the dirt road that cut past that land, something large moved as if it had forgotten how. An elephant, alone where no elephant belonged, dragged himself forward on legs gone narrow with hunger. His skin, ash-gray and dry, folded in loose ridges over sharp ribs. Each breath made his chest lift and fall with a shallow rattling sound. Around his front right leg, a short length of chain clung like a memory that would not let go. At every step, the broken link clicked softly against itself, a small metallic tick in the wide, quiet dark. There was no one left to pull on the chain. Still, his body walked as if it expected the tug. He had come from behind him on that road, where a livestock truck leaned crooked in a ditch, back doors hanging open. Straw, filth, and broken boards spilled into the weeds. Whatever people had been with him were gone. The air back there smelled of diesel and panic. Out here, it smelled of dust and old grass, and something like the edge of freedom, though he had no word for it. Fence posts appeared along his left side, uneven and splintered, stitched together by rusted wire. When his shoulder brushed one leaning post, a single nail slid free with a thin, tired squeal. The wire sagged. He did not notice the line he crossed. He simply moved the way tired bodies move, and the world around him gave way. His front foot caught a buried rock. The stumble was small. The fall was not. Knees struck first, then shoulder, then the mass of his flank, dust jumping up around him in a dull cloud. The chain rang once, bright and startled, then went quiet. When the dust settled, he lay on his side in someone else's pasture, ribs moving in a narrow, stubborn rhythm. He did not try to rise. His head rested on the dry earth, trunk curled in toward his chest. His eyes stayed open, dark and flat with a kind of exhausted obedience. He had stood when told, knelt when forced, walked when pulled. Now, with no one watching, his body had finally chosen not to. In the distance, a coyote called, and then fell silent, as if even hunger had decided to keep its distance. If stories like this reach something quiet inside you, follow this channel so you don't miss the next silent rescue. Every new follower helps these wordless lives find more hearts to rest in. On the far edge of the same land, the porch light flickered against the wind. Inside the farmhouse, a digital clock on the kitchen wall blinked 3:07 a.m., red numbers pulsing in the dim. The coffee pot was empty, but the smell had seeped into the walls years ago and never really left. May Collins lay awake in the bedroom at the back of the house. 59 years of weather and work had settled into her joints. She could feel every crooked spring in the mattress underneath her. Sleep had become a visitor that did not stay long. Tonight it had not come at all. She lay on her back, hands over her stomach, listening to the small sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of cooling pipes, the soft swing of a loose shutter outside. At the foot of her bed, Diesel lay curled in a heavy sea of muscle and fur. The Rottweiler's broad chest rose and fell in slow, steady waves. There had been a time when strangers came up the long driveway, and he announced each one with a barking storm. Now the driveway stayed empty most days. His training had nowhere to go, except into the habit of listening. The sound of the elephant's collapse never reached May's ears. The distance was too great, the night too thick, but the impact, 1,000 pounds surrendering to gravity, ran through the hard, dry ground. It shivered through roots, foundation stones, old floor joists, box springs. It reached the dog first. Diesel's eyes opened in the dark as if someone had called his name. For a few seconds he did not move. He just listened. The house gave him its usual answers. Hum, tick, distant creak. Outside, the wind shifted. With it came a smell that did not belong to this farm. He lifted his head and sniffed again. Deeper. Not coyote, not cow, not the neighbor's hogs. Something larger than any of those, heavy and unfamiliar, carrying with it traces of rust, stale sweat, and a fear so old it had gone quiet. Diesel pushed himself up, joints barely making a sound on the worn quilt. The mattress lightened under his weight. May exhaled and turned her face toward the wall, assuming he was chasing some dream. She did not see him step off the bed, shoulders rolling, ears angled toward the back of the house. His nails clicked on the hallway floorboards, picking up speed as he crossed the narrow hall. He paused at the front door just long enough to press his nose to the thin gap at the bottom. The night poured in. Dry air, distant dirt road, that strange, heavy scent sitting like a stone at the center of everything. He spun away from the door and headed for the kitchen. In the mudroom beyond, an old dog door still sat in the lower panel, its plastic flap stiff from disuse. Diesel pushed his head against it once, twice. The flap resisted, then gave with a slap of sound that cut through the quiet house. In another heartbeat, he was outside. The yard was darkness and dried weeds and the faint outline of empty cattle pens. Diesel paused only long enough to lift his head and orient himself. The scent drew him toward the far fence line, toward the place where something enormous lay breathing dust. Back in the bedroom, May sat up, heart beating faster than the rest of her body had agreed to. Diesel did not usually bolt like that. She swung her feet to the floor and reached for the lamp. Before she could switch it on, a gust of wind rattled the loose shutter hard enough to make the window tremble. For a second, she had the strangest sensation, not of being alone on the land, but of being watched from far out in the pasture. She shook it off, but the feeling stayed. Something had stepped onto her property tonight, and the only creature who still answered any call was already running straight toward it. Diesel broke into a run, the kind of full-bodied sprint his muscles remembered even if his years did not. The cold air sliced into his lungs, but he didn't slow. Clumps of dry grass brushed his legs, burrs catching on his fur. Ahead, the pasture was a black ocean, but that scent, metal, fear, something vast, pulled him like a current. Halfway across the field, he began to hear it. Not a sound exactly, more a pattern, a slow, uneven rush of air, in, out, like a bellows dragging itself through the last of its work. When he reached the broken stretch of fence, he stopped short. The mass in front of him was too big for his instincts to file under anything familiar. A hill, his old training said for one heartbeat. A truck, maybe. But hills didn't tremble when they breathed, and trucks didn't carry the smell of old chains and fresh dust and a heart still trying. The elephant lay on his side, taking up more ground than Diesel's mind could quite organize. Spine like a ridgeline, ribs like narrow hoops pressed hard against skin. His chest rose and fell shallowly, stirring the dust in front of his face. One ear twitched, then stilled. The short length of chain at his leg glinted dully in the weak starlight. Diesel barked once, sharp, throat deep. The sound rang out and scattered into the dark. The elephant's eye moved, that was all. A slow roll bringing the black, glassy center to bear on the source of the noise. No aggression, no flare of warning, just a long, heavy look, as if trying to decide whether this new creature belonged to the same world that had done all this to him. Diesel circled, not too close at first. His paws pressed shallow prints into the dust around the giant body. He sniffed the air above the elephant's head, the cracked skin near the ear, the faint, sour tang where weight had settled too long on one side. His bark changed from alarm to a softer, questioning chuff. He tilted his head, ears forward, jaw closed. The elephant tried to move his trunk. It lifted a few inches, trembled, and fell back, leaving a thin trail in the dirt. The effort sent a tremor along his flank. Diesel flinched, then adjusted, stepping closer, drawn into the gravity of that slow suffering. He stopped when he could feel the warmth coming off the elephant's skin. It was not the fierce heat of a fever, just the low, stubborn warmth of a body not ready to let go. For several breaths, they simply looked at each other. One pair of eyes framed in deep, ancient wrinkles, one set shining above a black muzzle dusted with dirt. Whatever passed between them had no word for it. But something in Diesel eased. His hackles smoothed down. His tail still gave one low, uncertain swing. Then he turned and ran back the way he had come. He did not take the straight line to the house. He veered toward the barn, then back, tracing a zigzag as if marking a trail in scent and memory. At the fence, he slipped through the same gap the elephant had forced. By the time he hit the packed dirt near the house, his legs were burning, but he pushed on, nails scrabbling on the porch boards as he leapt up. Inside, May had just swung her feet off the bed when he hit the dog door again. The flap slapped, and then he was in the hallway, a black and tan blur heading straight for her. "Diesel," she muttered, voice thick with sleep and annoyance. "What's gotten into you?" He didn't stop to be chastised. He shoved his head against her knees, then her hands, then turned toward the door, looking back over his shoulder. He let out a sharp, insistent bark that bounced off the walls. May frowned. Diesel had never been one for theatrics. He barked with purpose, or not at all. Something in the tone pulled at a place in her chest that worry lived in. All right, she sighed. But the word didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like fear wearing her voice. I'm coming. She grabbed the first thing she found at the foot of the bed, a faded flannel shirt, and shrugged it over her nightgown. Her work boots waited by the door as they always had, laces stuffed inside to save her the trouble. She jammed her feet into them and followed the dog. The cold hit her first when she opened the front door, a flat slap of air that smelled of dried grass and old wood. Then the dark hit her, wide and familiar. She lifted a flashlight from the shelf by instinct, thumb finding the switch. The beam cut a pale tunnel through the black. Diesel didn't wait for her to decide. He launched himself down the steps, glanced back once to be sure she was following, and then took off into the field. May cursed under her breath, but went after him, boots finding the path they'd walked too many early mornings to count. As she crossed the first stretch of pasture, nothing looked wrong. The fence lines were the same jagged teeth against the sky. The cattle pens were empty shadows. The wind tugged at her hair and stung her eyes. She swept the flashlight beam left and right. Probably just a damn raccoon, she told herself, though her heart had already moved ahead of her body, pounding faster than the pace of her steps. Or a coyote got too close. Diesel vanished into the darkness ahead, then reappeared, then vanished again. Each time he broke into the light, she caught the urgency in his posture, the way his body leaned forward, his head low, tail straight. And then she saw the broken fence. The flashlight beam caught the sagging wire, the post listing sideways, the ground scraped raw where something heavy had forced its way through. May stopped short, breath snagging in her throat. Damn it, she whispered. If the neighbor's bull... She lifted the light higher, following the raw scrape in the dirt. The beam slid along dust, clumps of dry grass, the glitter of something metallic. It climbed over a curve of gray, then another, and then the picture sharpened. For one stunned heartbeat, May's mind did exactly what Diesel's had done. It tried to file the shape in front of her under something it knew. Hill, tractor, pile of tarp. Then the ribcage rose and fell. The eye opened to the narrow slit of light and caught it, reflecting it back at her like a small, wet star. May's hand jerked. The flashlight trembled. No, she said aloud, but the word came out in a breath more than a voice. It wasn't refusal. It was disbelief trying and failing to hold the door shut. The elephant lay less than 20 yards in front of her, all bone and shadow and collapsed weight. The chain around his leg glinted in the jumpy beam. Each breath he took made the dust near his trunk shiver. Diesel had already reached him, planting himself near the huge head, looking back at May as if to say, here. This. Look. Her heart scrambled for logic and found none. This was Texas. This was her pasture. She was a woman with a failing farm, a dog, and an empty bed. There were no instructions in her life experience for what to do when an elephant fell out of the dark and landed in your care. But the body on the ground was too thin, the breaths too shallow, the eye too alive to be ignored. May's fingers tightened around the flashlight until her knuckles ached. For a moment she stood very still, caught between the urge to run back to the safety of her house and the knowledge that if she turned away now, that slow, stubborn breathing might not be there when she looked again. Diesel lowered himself to sit at the elephant's cheek, so close their warmth mingled in the cold air. He didn't bark. He just watched May, waiting to see which way her fear would break. For a few long seconds, the world narrowed to the circle of light, and the three of them inside it. Woman, dog, giant. The rest of the pasture might as well not have existed. The night held its breath. May swallowed, the taste of metal rising in her mouth. Somewhere behind her eyes, an old part of her started counting. Breaths per minute, injuries, risks. Years ago, when her husband had been thrown from a horse and she'd had to decide whether to wait for an ambulance or drive him herself, that same part of her had taken over. It didn't care what species lay at her feet. It only cared about whether there was still time. She forced her legs to move. Easy, she murmured to nobody and everybody, though the word drifted away on the wind more than it reached ears. The flashlight bobbed as she stepped closer, its beam skating over the elephant's shoulder, his flank, the jut of his hip. Up close, the smell hit her. Old hay, damp iron, sweat sunk into skin, and underneath it all a sour note of neglect. The chain around his leg was short, snapped close to the cuff. The metal had worn a ring into his flesh, skin thickened, hair rubbed away. Higher on his body, pale lines crossed his hide like dry riverbeds, scars, some old, some angry and red along the edges. May had seen ropes do that to cattle that had fought too long against them. Seeing it on a creature this size made something in her chest twist. The elephant watched her approach with that single dark eye. Not wild, not tame, just exhausted. Diesel shifted, as if to put himself between them, and then thought better of it, letting her step into the narrow space between his shoulder and the great curve of the head. "Hey," May said, because there was nothing else to say, and because silence felt suddenly unbearable. Her hand hovered in the air, uncertain where to land. On the farm, you didn't touch an animal until you decided whether you were going to help it or put it down. She wasn't ready to answer that question. She let her fingers fall to the dust instead, feeling the fine powder on her skin. Her knees creaked as she crouched. She moved the light, slowly, along the line of the trunk. It lay coiled in front of his mouth like a tired arm, the tip barely stirring. With the beam angled right, she could see it tremble with each breath. "Water," she heard herself say. The word dropped into the space between them like a stone into a still pond. "You need water." It was less an observation, more a decision. She stood again, joints protesting, and turned back toward the house. Diesel lifted his head as if to follow, then stayed when she held a hand out toward him. "Watch him," she said. This time the words landed. Diesel stayed. The walk back to the house felt longer than the one out. Her boots seemed to pick up extra weight with each step. The flashlight beam bounced over familiar shapes. The barn, the rusted trough, the stack of unused fence posts, turning them strange and sharp-edged. In the kitchen, everything looked suddenly too small for her life. The sink, the counters, the chipped mug by the coffee maker. She grabbed every clean bucket she could find, then every dirty one, dumping out old feed, spiders, dust. The well pump at the side of the house groaned when she flipped it on, then spat a cough of rusty water before settling into a steady flow. She filled bucket after bucket, muscles remembering the work, even if the reasons had changed. As each one brimmed, she dragged it to the edge of the porch, lining them up. Her hands were already beginning to ache, tendons pulling tight. She ignored it. By the time she loaded the first two into the back of her old pickup, a faint band of gray was beginning to show at the horizon, thinning the black of the sky. She drove the truck as far into the pasture as she dared without rutting the dry ground, stopping when the broken fence came into view. The headlights washed over the scene in a harsh glare. For a moment, the elephant was reduced to angles and shadows, too bright and too stark. May cut the engine. Darkness rolled back in around them, gentler. She took a bucket in each hand and walked the last stretch. Diesel met her halfway, sniffing the metal rims, tail flicking once. There was dust on his muzzle now, gray on black, and something calmer in his eyes. He trotted beside her as she approached the elephant again. May set the first bucket down near his trunk, the second a little farther away. The water sloshed quietly, catching what little light there was. For a few breaths, nothing happened. Then the elephant's trunk twitched. It slid forward an inch, then two, feeling as much as reaching. The tip brushed the rim of the bucket and knocked it sideways. Water splashed out, darkening the dust. "Easy," May whispered, as if he were a skittish colt and the sound of her voice might somehow steady him. She nudged the bucket back upright, then dipped her hand in and lifted a palmful to his mouth level, letting the cold liquid spill through her fingers onto his cracked skin. The trunk followed the water. It rose slowly, shaking with the effort, and sank into the bucket, curling against the metal. He sucked, not greedily but steadily, drawing long pulls of water up and into himself. The sound of it was small and desperate and holy all at once. May felt something inside her loosen with each swallow he took. She didn't realize she'd been holding her own breath until she let it out in a shudder. "You're thirsty," she said softly. "All right, we can start there." She emptied bucket after bucket that way. Him drinking, her refilling from the truck, Diesel pacing between them as if keeping count. When the last one ran dry, she stepped back to take in the whole of him again. The elephant's breathing had steadied a little. His eye had lost some of its flatness. In the dim wash of dawn, his skin looked less like stone and more like what it was, a living landscape, marked and weathered, but still inhabited. May's gaze dropped to the scars. One ran along his side in a long, skewed line, as if something sharp had once tried to write its name there and failed. Another puckered near his shoulder, round and ugly. The ring around his leg where the chain had bitten in was a bruise that had been turned permanent. She thought of all the stories she'd heard over the years about traveling shows, roadside attractions with exotic animals kept in pens smaller than her kitchen. She'd never seen one up close. She'd never wanted to. But looking at him now, she felt a cold, quiet anger settle in beneath her ribs. "This is it, then," she murmured. "This is where you broke loose." The sun pushed a little higher, staining the horizon with a faint, tired pink. Birds started up somewhere behind them, tentative at first, then more insistent. The world was waking up, and she was standing in the middle of her pasture, with a creature that could flatten her truck and a dog who had decided to adopt him. May backed away slowly, turned once to look at the house, then at the barn, then at the narrow, sagging outline of her life. There were 100 reasons to call someone else, to make this problem leave her fences the way it had come. Instead, she walked to the barn. The doors creaked on rusty hinges when she pulled them open. Dust lay thick on old tack hooks and empty stalls. Spiderwebs tied rafters to walls like forgotten promises. She grabbed a stack of baled hay, the ones she'd been saving for just in case, and hauled them toward the open space nearest the entrance. Then she found a tarp, a length of rope, an old stock tank she could drag closer to the fence. By the time she returned to the elephant, the pink had become a thin orange sear at the edge of the world. Diesel had lain down beside the massive head, his back pressed lightly against the folded ear. He lifted his head when she approached, eyes steady, as if to say, "We're still here." May crouched again, closer this time. She let her hand rest, finally, on the elephant's cheek. The skin was rough, warm, alive. Beneath her palm, she could feel the slow, stubborn thud of his heart. "August," she said, surprising herself, the name rising from some old corner of her memory, tied to the hottest, hardest month of the year. The month when everything looked dead, and then, somehow, didn't die. Her voice was barely more than a breath. "You came at the end of summer and you still haven't given up. August it is." That night, after she'd dragged the stock tank closer and made a rough shelter of tarp and hay and intention, she sat at the kitchen table with an old spiral-bound notebook she hadn't touched since her husband passed. Her hand hovered over the first blank page, then began to move. August arrived sometime after 3 a.m., thin as the fence line, still breathing. Dog found him first. We're all still deciding what happens next. The ink bled a little into the paper, like water into dry soil, making the words at once fragile and permanent. Days did not so much pass as they layered themselves over the farm, thin and persistent as dust. The first morning after August's arrival, the sky came up pale and chalky, as if the sun were unsure whether it was worth the trouble. May woke sore in places she hadn't felt in years. Her hands ached from hauling buckets, her shoulders from moving hay, her lower back from bending over a creature that could have crushed her with a shrug. Diesel woke differently, alert and ready, as if the night had been a nap between shifts. He trotted from room to room until May finally swung her legs off the bed. When she opened the back door, he was already aimed toward the pasture, waiting only because she had the opposable thumbs and the truck keys. They fell into a pattern quickly, not because they planned it, but because survival has always loved routine. Morning. Fill the stock tank from the well, the pump coughing at first, and then giving itself over to the work. May would lean her weight into the handle, feeling the simple mercy of water coming when called. Diesel would pace the ground beside her, nails scratching in impatient arcs, then race ahead when she loaded the buckets, checking the path like a scout. August was where they had left him, not quite as crumpled, but far from strong. His head lifted when the truck approached, trunk stirring, sniffing the air before the tires even stopped crunching. He did not trumpet. He did not flail. He watched, and in his watching, something like trust began to kindle. May carried the water closer each day, letting him decide how much energy he could spare to meet it. The first morning she had to bring it almost to his mouth. On the second, his trunk rose more easily, finding the bucket without knocking it over. By the third, he slid his trunk into the stock tank itself, pulling in deep, steady drafts that made hollow glugs before disappearing into him. Diesel tested every boundary before August did. If May dragged the tank a foot farther from where it had been, Diesel would be the first to step into the new space, to sniff the ground, to lay down his scent there with casual, unhurried confidence. When May opened the old barn wider, moving debris and pulling aside years' worth of cobwebbed tools, Diesel was the first to trot inside, nose working, as if to say, "I've checked it. It won't hurt you." He started a game, though no one would have called it that out loud. One afternoon the wind came hot and relentless, blowing grit into May's eyes and under her shirt. She had filled the stock tank again and stood back to let August drink as he pleased. Diesel, restless and lightly dusted in gray, circled the tank, leaned in to lap a bit of water himself, then plunged his chest in, front paws splashing. Water arced out, cold against the heat. It hit August's trunk and cheek in a stuttering pattern, little shocks of sensation. Diesel jerked back, shook himself wildly, sending more droplets flying. His tail cut the air in a wide, sweeping wag. May almost scolded him, habit from a lifetime of, "No splashing in the trough, you'll spook the stock." But then she saw August's eye, the way the lid lifted, the way the pupils sharpened, the way his trunk followed the splash, not away from it, but into it. He dipped the tip into the water and flung a small stream toward Diesel. It was a weak throw, clumsy and slow, but it landed on the dog's back and head. Diesel froze, as if struck not by water but by surprise. Then he did the most natural thing in the world. He demanded more. He barked once, high for a Rottweiler, then plunged his paws into the tank again, sending another spray upward. This time, August tried harder. The water went farther, splattering the dust around them, spotting Diesel's coat, catching May's boots. For a few seconds, the heat and the hunger and the scars were all still there, but so was something else, small and wild and alive. They repeated the ritual every day. The tank was full and the heat allowed. Water, splash, trunk, bark. The rhythm of their play braided itself with the rhythm of their healing. On days when August was too tired, he simply watched Diesel roll in the mud that formed at the base of the trough, then lay his trunk in the damp earth, pulling the coolness into his skin. May began to measure progress not in pounds or inches, but in circles. At first, August's world was a rough oval in the dirt where his body lay. Then it expanded to the reach of his trunk, the stock tank, the tarp shelter. Later, when his strength allowed, he shifted his weight and pushed his front half up, then his back. The first time he stood fully, all 4 feet under him. The effort made the ground tremble. May counted the seconds under her breath. 1, 2, 3. By 10, his legs began to shake. At 12, he eased himself back down with an audible sigh. Diesel stayed pressed close to one of his forelegs the whole time, back warm against gray hide, a steady point in the wobble. After a week of mornings and evenings spent in that improvised triage, May sat at her kitchen table with her old laptop open. The screen's bluish light painted her lined face in an unkind hue. She typed slowly, fingers unused to the keys, and searched. Abandoned exotic animal truck, Texas. The headlines came up in jagged rows. A vehicle discovered in the ditch 2 counties over. A driver nowhere to be found. Crates with broken locks. 2 animals missing. Rumors of private collectors and illegal shows threaded through the articles without anyone writing the words outright. There were photos. One showed the back of the truck, doors askew, straw and chain spilling like intestines. Another showed blurry shapes in the distance that could have been anything. May closed her eyes. She didn't need the pictures. She had the scars in her pasture. Her next search was different. Elephant Sanctuary, United States, she typed. Then, heart beating faster. Elephant Sanctuary, Texas, help. Websites loaded, full of grassy enclosures, ponds, promises of peace. She scrolled through mission statements and donation buttons, through photos of elephants standing shoulder to shoulder in open spaces that made her fields look like postage stamps. Her thumb hovered over the number on one of the pages. If she called, men with permits and trailers and tranquilizer guns might come. If she didn't call, August might never be more than a miracle stranded in the wrong story. Not yet, she whispered to the empty kitchen, the laptop humming its quiet, impatient hum. You just got here. She wrote the number down in her notebook anyway, beneath the first entry, as if setting a bookmark in a chapter she wasn't ready to turn yet. In the evenings, when the sun slumped low and the shadows stretched long, May would lean against the fence and watch the two of them, giant and dog, move together through the growing circle of August's world. At first, August took hesitant, shuffling steps, each footfall stirring its own little storm of dust. His legs seemed to argue with one another about how to share the weight. Diesel walked ahead of him, close enough to guide, far enough not to be crushed. Every few steps, he would glance back, checking, then push forward again, drawing August along a path that traced from the stock tank to the patch of shade beneath a mesquite tree. The first time they made it all the way there, August stood under the thin branches and simply breathed. Diesel collapsed at his feet, tongue lolling, sides heaving, pleased with a job well done. On a day when the sky was the color of old denim and the air hinted at rain it would not deliver, May opened the barn doors fully. The hinges protested, then gave, letting a rush of cooler air into the stale interior. Dust motes floated in the slanting light, turning the space into an underwater world. She cleared out the first stall, dragging rotted boards and broken equipment into a pile outside. She spread fresh hay over the floor, shaking it loose from bales that had once been reserved for horses that would never return. When she stepped back and looked at it, the stall still looked too small for the weight of what she was asking it to hold, so she kept the doors wide and the path clear, a gesture more than a solution. That evening, she walked out to the pasture and stood near August and Diesel, hands in her pockets, heart in her throat. She didn't call, she didn't coax. She just turned and walked slowly toward the barn, footsteps steady, leaving space between them for a choice. Diesel understood first. He rose, shook dust from his coat, and fell in behind her, then veered off to the side, angling himself between May and August, facing the elephant now. He gave a low woof and trotted a few paces toward the barn, then back, then toward it again, like a pendulum swinging between old life and new shelter. August watched. His ears lifted, catching sounds only he could hear. The barn, the open doors, the dark coolness inside. None of it meant safety to a body that had learned, over and over, that enclosed spaces bite. He took one step. The ground held. Diesel wagged once and repeated his little arc, barn to elephant, elephant to barn. August took another step. His chain stub clinked softly against itself, a ghost of old restraint trying to speak up. Diesel's presence smoothed its voice to a whisper. They moved together, slow as a prayer, across the space between pasture and threshold. When August's shadow touched the shadow inside the barn, he hesitated. Diesel trotted up the ramp of packed earth May had built at the entrance, then disappeared into the dim, his shape swallowed by the softer dark. For a long, fragile moment, August's front feet stood on one world and his back feet on another. Then he shifted his weight forward. One massive foot crossed the line, then the other, until his whole body passed beneath the wide doorway. Inside, the air was cooler, scented with hay and wood and the faint, lingering memory of horses. Diesel waited just inside, tail moving slowly, like a metronome set to a slower, steadier song. May stayed outside the doorway, back against the outer wall, hand pressed to the rough boards as if she could feel his pulse through them. In a way, she could. The barn had not held this kind of weight in years. It seemed to settle around him, adjusting, remembering its purpose. August exhaled, a long, low sound that was neither fear nor relief, but something in between. Dust drifted down from the rafters in lazy spirals, catching the last light of day. For the first time since he'd stumbled through her broken fence, he was standing under a roof that might one day mean shelter instead of cage, and he had not walked into it alone. News did not arrive as a siren or a headline. It arrived as a neighbor with a phone. The first time May saw the truck slow on the road, she didn't think much of it. People rubbernecked all the time when they passed her place, mostly to note how much more the fences leaned, how much less the fields held. But this truck didn't just slow, it crawled, then stopped. From the pasture, where she was refilling the stock tank, May watched the shape of a man lean out of the driver's window, elbow hooked, body twisted toward her land. His arm lifted, and for a moment she thought he might be waving. Then the sun caught the rectangle in his hand. It glittered. A small, knowing eye pointed not at her, but at what stood behind her. August, mid-sip, trunk curled into the tank. Diesel, shoulder pressed casually against one column of gray leg. May felt the air change. She straightened, water slushing in the bucket. For a second she considered striding up to the fence, all tired authority, and asking him what exactly he thought he was doing. But the man had already turned the phone slightly, framing the shot, capturing the impossible angle. Rottweiler and elephant, side by side, breathing the same dust. She heard the click of a still photo, then the tiny, unmistakable whir of video recording. Diesel's ears flicked. August lifted his head, dropping a thin stream of water that darkened the earth by his feet. May wanted to move, to shout, to step in front of the lens the way Diesel always stepped between her and the door when strangers came. Instead, she stood very still, heart pounding, as the truck idled for a few eternal seconds more and then rolled on, leaving a smear of dust and possibility in its wake. That night, the sky over the farm was restless, clouds stacked on the horizon, arguing with the moon. Crickets started up late and loud. May sat at her kitchen table with her notebook open, pen hovering above the nearly full page. "He filmed them," she wrote, hand tightening. "I don't know what comes next." The answer came sooner than she expected. 2 mornings later, the sound of tires on gravel announced visitors before she saw them. Not a lone truck this time, but a pair. A county pickup with a seal on the door, and behind it, a long trailer whose very shape made the air around it stiffen. May met them halfway down the drive, Diesel pacing at her heel. The officials stepped out with the stiff movements of people who knew they were being watched, even if right now their only audience was a woman, a dog, and distant crows. One wore a county animal control jacket, sun-faded at the shoulders. The other had a clipboard, a glossy brochure sticking out from under the metal clip. Behind them, the trailer loomed, its metal sides reflecting the empty sky. "Morning, ma'am," the one with the jacket said, touching the brim of a cap he probably thought made him gentler. His words were polite, but his eyes had already slid past her toward the pasture. May had lived through enough inspections and warnings to read the lines before they were spoken. Liability, public safety, not permitted, not equipped. She heard the phrases in the way they looked at the broken fence, at the barn, at the empty cattle pens. "We've had some reports," Clipboard began, clearing his throat, "about a large animal on your property, potentially from that wreck out on 42. May's jaw tightened. "He walked himself here," she said before she could stop herself. "Regardless," Jacket said, with the patient tone of someone laying out the obvious, "this is not an approved holding facility. We're here to assess the situation and determine transfer options. For everyone's safety." Everyone's safety. The words landed heavy, as if August were a loaded gun lying in the grass. Diesel's body pressed more firmly against May's leg, reading her muscle tension like a second language. His gaze tracked the men's movements, hard and appraising. They asked to see him. May could have said no. She could have reminded them that this was her land, her fence, her risk. But the trailer stood there, empty and expectant, and in some small, fearful place inside her, she knew. She could not keep hiding a creature this large and this hurt from a world that had already sniffed him out. She led the way. The walk across the pasture felt different with boots behind her that weren't hers. The grass seemed shorter, the fence lines more crooked, the sky a size too big for the small drama her life had been until now. Diesel ranged ahead, then dropped back, then surged forward again, drawing invisible lines between May and the men, between the truck and the barn, between old life and new. When August came into view, the official stopped. Even from a distance, his presence rearranged the air. He was standing now more often than not. Weight distributed more evenly, ribs less stark, but still visible. The chain fragment around his leg caught the morning light like a thin, accusing finger. For a moment, none of them said anything. The only sounds were the clink of metal as August shifted and the soft, rhythmic tap of Diesel's claws on hard-packed earth. "Jesus," Clipboard whispered, though he wasn't talking to God. Jacket cleared his throat again. "He's in better condition than the report suggested," he said mechanically, as if clinging to protocol. "But this is highly irregular." August watched them approach, ears angling, trunk lifting an inch to taste their scent. His gaze flicked from unfamiliar faces to the familiar line of May's shoulders, to the compact shape of Diesel moving between them. The men fanned out, one slightly to the left, one to the right, reading the ground with their eyes. Distance, angles, exits. May saw it all and felt the old anger rise again, hotter this time. She had seen men move like that around skittish bulls, around wild horses, around anything they'd decided needed containing. The animal control officer spoke into a radio clipped to his collar, words short and coded. The trailer door eased open with a loud, echoing clang. From inside, the smell of metal and old straw washed out, sharp enough that August shifted his feet. Diesel stiffened. From the back of their truck, the men pulled out equipment, a coil of rope, a long pole, a case that might hold darts or might hold something gentler. May didn't want to know yet. Each object they carried had the same message written into its shape. We'll move you whether you understand or not. May stepped closer to August, her presence small but intent. Diesel read that too. His body lowered slightly, ready to move. We're just going to get a closer look, Jacket said over his shoulder, as if narrating for a camera. See how responsive he is. Whether we can lead him, or if we'll need to. He didn't finish the sentence out loud. The gesture of his hand toward the dart case finished it for him. They came within a few yards before August's body made its decision. The sight of the trailer, the scent of the stale metal interior, the posture of the men. It was too much like other days, other trucks, other pain. Something flashed through him. Not memory and pictures, but memory and muscle. His ears flared wide, his trunk lifted, then curled close. Weight shifted backward, then surged forward. In an instant, the calm giant became a storm. He lunged, not at them, but away. The ground shook under the sudden violence of his movement. Dust rose in a thick sheet. The chain around his leg whipped and chimed, a terrible little bell. He headed for the open pasture, for the broken stretch of fence, for anything that did not look like a cage. The men shouted. Someone's hat flew off. The rope fell unused from a startled hand. May's heart slammed against her ribs. If August hit the fence at that speed, he'd go through it and straight onto the road beyond. A creature that size, panicking, could die in a ditch or kill someone else, or prove every fear right in a single bad second. The only one who didn't freeze was Diesel. He sprinted, but not away, straight toward August. May's throat locked. The officials cursed. Dust swallowed the world for a heartbeat. Out of that swirling brown, two shapes emerged. The vast, charging bulk of the elephant, and in front of it, absurdly small, the dark streak of the dog. Diesel planted himself directly in August's path, paws braced, head lifted, chest out. His bark, when it came, was the loudest May had ever heard from him. Not aggressive, not warning, but desperate, a single syllable thrown like a rope. August saw him. In the tight, wild tunnel of his panic, that one familiar form cut through. At the last possible moment, he hauled his weight sideways. Feet dug into the dirt, carving grooves. His whole body shuddered with the effort of stopping. The air filled with the sound of displaced earth and straining tendons. He stopped with Diesel almost under his chest. The men fell silent. The dust drifted down in slow curtains. For a long, stunned heartbeat, an elephant and a Rottweiler stood in the same footprint of ground, close enough for the dog's breath to warm the wrinkled skin above him. Then August did the most dangerous, gentle thing he could. He lowered his head. Carefully, trembling, he brought his trunk down until its heavy length rested along Diesel's back, the tip brushing the dog's shoulder. Not pinning, not pressing, just asking. The massive head dipped further, enormous forehead nearly touching the ground beside the dog. It was a posture that did not belong in any training manual. A giant kneeling in front of something smaller, putting its most vulnerable parts within reach. To anyone watching, it read as one thing only. I don't know what they want. I only know I trust you. Diesel didn't move. His tail gave one slow, steady sweep. His body remained braced, but no longer against impact, against fear. Behind them, the open trailer gaped. The rope lay in the dirt. The dart case hung limp from Jacket's hand. For the first time since they'd stepped out of their trucks, the officials saw not a case, but a question. What do you do with two different creatures who have already chosen each other? Clipboard cleared his throat. the sound small in the wide, shocked morning. "Maybe," he said, voice rough. "We call someone else." They made the call from May's kitchen. The officials sat at her table like reluctant guests, hats on their knees, boots leaving crescents of dirt on the faded linoleum. The dart case and rope stayed shut on the counter, useless now under the hum of the old refrigerator. Diesel lay stretched in the doorway, a living doorstop, watching every movement with hooded, wary eyes. On the screen of the animal control officer's phone, a logo glowed, a sun over trees, a small silhouette of an elephant mid-step. May didn't know it yet, but people all over the state did. It belonged to a sanctuary 4 hours away, down south, where land was cheaper and hearts had been raised on loss. He put the call on speaker. "Ma'am," a woman's voice said after he explained, calm and sure in a way that made May's tight chest ache. "We don't move an elephant like that with darts if we can help it, especially not one who's already chosen a friend. We come to him slow. We give him time to decide if he wants to come to us." The officer glanced at May, as if asking permission for something far bigger than a drive. May's fingers were laced so tightly together that her knuckles looked carved. She unclenched them one by one. "He walked himself out of something that nearly killed him," she said quietly. "I'd like the next place he goes to feel different." The woman on the phone didn't say, "We can't promise that." She said, "We'll bring his kind of different." They came 2 days later. The waiting turned those days thick. Each hour seemed to stretch around its own worry. May kept August's water full, his hay fresh, his world gentle. She spoke more than she had in months, not to the men who'd left the first trailer behind, though they came by once to check in, but to the giant and the dog. "Turns out you have a fan club," she told August one evening, leaning on the fence while Diesel dozed at his feet. "They've been watching that neighbor's video online, calling you brave, calling him—" She nodded at the dog. "A hero. Internet sure loves a miracle it didn't have to do the work for." August pulled dust into the air with a slow swing of his trunk, letting it settle along his back, like a second, finer skin. If he had feelings about being seen by a world that had ignored him for so long, they lived deep, where language never quite reached. Diesel felt something coming. The foreign trucks, the restless tone in May's voice, the way she checked the road more than she checked the sky. He stayed closer than ever, his path between house and pasture worn into the dirt. When the sanctuary convoy rolled up, one long trailer with reinforced sides, a smaller truck full of equipment, another carrying people, May's land went quiet in a new way. Even the wind seemed to step back. The trailer was different from the first, taller, with slats that let light and air through. Its interior padded, its floor covered in thick layers of bedding. On its side, the same logo from the phone call. Sun, trees, walking elephant. The symbol of a place that had learned, the hard way, what not to be. The woman who stepped out of the lead truck was older than May had expected, or maybe just older in the eyes. She wore boots caked with mud from a dozen other enclosures, a shirt with the sanctuary's name, and a kind of quiet that filled the space around her like water fills a low place. "You must be May," she said, holding out a hand. May took it. The grip was firm, calloused, alive with a familiarity of weight. "And you must be the cavalry," she answered. Her voice shook just enough to show how close to the edge she'd been balancing. The woman's gaze slid past her toward the pasture the way everyone's did now. But when she saw August, her whole body seemed to soften in recognition, not shock. "Oh," she breathed, "you're thinner than the photos." Then, more to herself than anyone else, "But you're still here." Her team moved differently than the county men had. No rope slung ready in their hands, no dart guns at their hips. They carried buckets of chopped produce, apples, carrots, squash, smelling bright and sweet even from a distance. One man hauled a bale of something greener and softer than the hay May had. Another carried a long, worn stick that looked like a walking cane. At the end of it was a small cloth bag, empty and clean. "Target stick," the woman explained, catching May's look. "We teach them to follow it. Promise at the end of it. Choice in every step." They didn't march straight at August. They curved toward him in a wide arc, stopping well before his threshold of fear. They let him see them adjust their speed to his breath, not the other way around. Diesel stood between them and his giant, body low, ribs expanding with every deep inhale. This time his wariness did not spike into panic. The way they moved, They reminded him, in some strange animal calculus, of May, steady, measured, more offering than demand. The woman, her name, May learned, was Rosa, stopped and lowered herself to a crouch. She let August smell the air around her, the sharp scent of produce and other elephants and sunblock. Then she held out one hand, palm up, not reaching for him, just letting the space between them fill with the possibility. From the bucket beside her, she pulled a slice of apple and set it on the ground halfway toward his trunk. August watched. Diesel sniffed. The dog took one step toward it, then looked back at August, as if asking permission. The elephant's trunk stirred, then extended, the movement slow but curious. Dust puffed as the trunk slid forward, hesitated above the fruit, then curled around it and lifted. He tucked it into his mouth. The crunch, when it came, was crisp and startling in the quiet. "Good," Rosa said softly, more prayer than praise. She tapped the little cloth bag at the end of the stick against the ground, then near the bucket, then dipped it gently into the produce as if baptizing it in sweetness. When she lifted it again, the scent of sugar and water and something green rode the air. She held the stick out, the bag end closer to August, like a small white star on a thin branch. He reached for it. The first time his trunk touched the bag, Rosa brought it back toward the bucket and let him see where it led. More apple, more carrot, another piece of something good. It took time to knit the pattern in his mind. Touch, follow, reward, choice. Diesel came along like a shadow, each test step mirrored by 4 smaller paws. When August stopped, so did he. When August swayed, he shifted his stance, offering a steadying presence without even knowing that's what he was doing. Hours passed in inches. They did not ask August to climb the trailer that afternoon. They asked him to touch the target from different angles, to take a few steps, to let their voices become part of the air that meant feed and water and no pain. By late day, the sun was hanging heavy and red over the far line of trees. Rosa stood with May by the fence, sweat darkening the back of her shirt, watching Diesel and August rest side by side near the stock tank. "He won't fit this place much longer," Rosa said gently. "You know that." May smiled without humor. "He doesn't fit it now. I'm just stubborn. Stubborn is how a lot of them live long enough to reach us." Rosa tapped the fence once, thoughtfully. "When we load him, it needs to be his decision. But your dog," she nodded toward Diesel, "he might be the key." They waited a day, 2. The world beyond the farm had already moved on to other curiosities, but here everything leaned toward a single question. When? It happened on a morning washed clean by a rare night of rain. The earth, damp and dark, held tracks more clearly. The air smelled new and old at once. They parked the sanctuary trailer closer this time, its ramp lowered, its interior already bedded thick. The target stick was ready, the buckets full. Rosa and her team took their positions, patient and silent. May stood by the fence, fingers digging into the wood so she wouldn't reach for something she had to let go. Diesel moved first. He trotted up the ramp, as if it were any other rise in the land, paws thudding on the padded floor. Inside, he turned in a quick circle, sniffing every corner, examining the walls where previous journeys had left faint, comforting traces. Elephant smell, hay, the ghost of long rides that ended in wide fields instead of chains. He shook himself, then trotted back down, ears high, tail loose. He did it again. Up, circle, out. Each time he glanced at August, who watched from a few yards away, weight shifting from front feet to back. The target stick tapped lightly on the ramp. Rosa stood a safe distance away from August's shoulder, body open, eyes steady. In the bag at the end of the stick, the promise of sweetness. August stepped forward, 1 foot onto the damp earth near the base of the ramp. Pause, breath. The second foot joined it. His trunk touched the bag, then slid past it to the ramp itself, feeling the give of the padding, the angle of the slope. Diesel trotted halfway up and looked back, tongue lolling as if to say, "It holds." See? The moment stretched thin as glass. The smell of the old truck, of other bad journeys, reached up from August's memory, trying to tighten around his chest. But the scent inside this trailer was different, layered with green and hay and the faint presence of multiple elephants, not alone but together. He lifted one massive foot and placed it on the ramp. The wood flexed. The world did not end. Behind him, May's fingers slipped on the fence, palms sweating. She wanted to call out, to promise, to beg. Instead, she clamped her jaw shut and let the scene right itself. Second foot, third. Diesel backing up gently, never crowding, always in view. Rosa stepping slowly backward, target stick leading, never pulling. The sanctuary team ready but still, like stones framing a river rather than dams trying to stop it. When August's full weight settled onto the trailer floor, the structure sighed but held. He stood there, just inside, chest heaving, flanks trembling with the effort of crossing that invisible line between before and after. Diesel stayed by his front legs, then lay down, pressed lightly against one, as if anchoring him in place. His presence said what none of them dared. "We don't know exactly where you're going, but you're not going alone." The ramp lifted with a low, careful groan. The door swung shut, locking the light into narrow bands that striped August's skin. Through the slats, May could see fragments. An eye, the curve of a shoulder, the dark bulk of Diesel's body at his feet. The convoy pulled away slowly, the heavy trailer rolling down her drive, turning onto the road that had once brought only bills and bad news. Dust rose in its wake, but this dust felt different, less like erasure, more like a blessing being shaken loose. May stood at the edge of her property until the last hint of metal disappeared over the shallow rise. Her throat ached with everything she hadn't said aloud. In her notebook that night, she wrote only one line. August and Diesel are on their way to a place with more sky than walls. The sanctuary did not look like a miracle from the road. It looked like fences and trees and long, low buildings set back from the highway, the sign modest, the entrance almost shy. You could drive past it 100 times and never imagine how many lives were learning to breathe again inside its boundaries. August arrived in the cool edge of morning, when the mist still clung to the grass and the air felt kind to lungs that had known too much heat. The truck turned off the pavement onto a gravel lane, each stone crunch sounding different than the road he'd come from. Softer, less certain of itself. Inside the trailer, the world swayed. August shifted his weight as the wheels rolled over small dips and rises. Diesel lay tucked against his front feet, occasionally lifting his head to sniff, then resting his chin back on crossed paws. Under them both, the floor carried the memory of other elephants who had ridden this way and not ended in cages. Rosa's voice floated back now and then, calm and steady through the open window panels. "Almost there," she said, though the words were more for herself and the driver than for the animals. "Just a little longer." The convoy passed through a wide gate. Beyond it, the land opened. Broad fields dotted with clusters of trees, red earth and bright grass, a pond glinting in the distance. Shapes moved there, other elephants, their backs familiar silhouettes against the sky. The trailer came to a stop in a shaded clearing, near a gently sloping ramp already waiting, lined with rubber mats and flanked by sturdy rails. People gathered at a respectful distance. Caregivers, volunteers, faces lined with the particular mix of hope and caution that comes from loving something that can break your heart, even as it heals. They lowered the ramp slowly. Light poured in, warm and green-tinted, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and bodies like his. August blinked. He could feel the difference in the air before he saw it. This space did not smell of small circles and stale straw. It smelled of distance, of water, of others. Diesel stood first. He stretched his front legs, shook out his coat, and trotted down the ramp as if to test it all over again. At the bottom, he stopped and looked up, ears perked, tail giving one measured swing. His gaze held a question that somehow also held an answer. "You got this." Rosa raised the target stick, the little cloth bag at its tip now heavy with chopped fruit. She kept her body turned slightly sideways, non-threatening, her eyes soft. "All right, big man," she murmured. "You tell us." August's trunk lifted. It hesitated above the line where shadow met light, then slid forward. The end brushed the cloth, then followed it, step by careful step. One foot on the ramp, then another. Each time his full weight shifted onto the sloping surface, the wood creaked, but it held. Diesel paced backward, keeping just ahead, never out of sight. The sanctuary staff barely breathed. When August's front feet found the ground, he stopped and stood, his body half in the trailer, half in this new world. Wind moved through the trees, carrying bird calls and distant splashes. Somewhere far off, another elephant trumpeted, a low, rolling sound, neither alarm nor command, just presence. August stepped down fully. The earth under him felt different, softer, springier, not packed thin by too many hooves in too small a space. His toes sank slightly into the damp soil. He tested it, shifting his weight, listening for the groan of boards, the echo of walls. None came. The other elephants watched from their own enclosures, eyes dark and deep. Some had once known chains, too. They recognized the stiffness in his gait, the way his body held itself as if waiting for an order that never came. They did not hurry to him. Here, time was not something to be snatched. It was something to be offered. Rosa guided him to a smaller, separate paddock. A quiet yard, she called it. A place for new arrivals to rest and learn the shapes of safety. There was shade, a mud wallow, a shallow pool where water waited still and clean. There was distance enough to see the others and not be pressed by them. Diesel trotted the perimeter like a cop with a new beat, nose working, mapping every scent. He paused at the gate, sniffed the latch, then settled himself beside it as if he had taken a shift no one had dared to assign him. In the days that followed, the world turned itself around this new center. August 8. At first, slowly, as if suspicious of abundance. The sanctuary staff brought armfuls of fresh hay, bushels of produce, supplements mixed into small, sweet pellets. His tongue worked, his jaws ground, his body began to remember what it felt like to be fed for restoration and not for display. He learned that the target stick meant choice, not command. Touch, step, reward. Sometimes the reward was a slice of melon, sometimes just a gentle rub on the forehead, sometimes the relief of no further request. His muscles, which had been braced for years against the next demand, started to find new positions to rest in. Diesel became a strange moving piece of furniture in the quiet yard. He lay in the shade when August dozed, paced when August paced, wandered only as far as the gate allowed, and no farther. The staff joked about him needing his own employee badge. Rosa only smiled and said, "He's on a different payroll." Video of their loading had already slipped into the wider world by then. Clips of a Rottweiler walking calmly into a trailer beside an elephant had been shared, liked, captioned with words like, "Unbelievable, heart-melting, faith in humanity restored." People argued in comments about whether animals felt loyalty like that, or if humans were just projecting. In the sanctuary, no one argued. They simply watched. The shock the internet talked about, the surprise that a starved, traumatized giant would place its trust not in rope or metal, but in the soft insistence of a dog, had been only the first ripple. The deeper shock, the one that didn't fit neatly into a headline, came later, when the patterns settled in. It came in the way August, once strong enough, would walk himself to the pond each evening, Diesel trotting alongside. How he would stand knee-deep in the water, trunk tracing slow circles on the surface, as if stirring memories into something new. How, on some nights, he would lift a trunkful of water and let it fall not on his own back, but over Diesel, baptizing that blocky little body in a rain the dog never tried to dodge. It came in the way Diesel, once a guard dog, stopped treating the gate as the edge of his world and started treating it as a line he honored. He did not try to chase the other elephants, did not bark at them. He watched them, and sometimes when one moved closer to the fence, he wagged his tail slowly, like a flag of truce. Months later, when the weight had returned to August's frame, when his scars had faded from angry to merely present, when the chain mark around his leg had softened into a pale ring of memory, May came. She stepped out of Rosa's truck with the stiffness of someone who had been holding herself together one day too long. The sanctuary spread out before her, all that green and sky, and she felt small in a way that did not hurt. Diesel saw her first. He was lying under a tree near the edge of August's yard, half asleep, one ear flicking at flies. His head snapped up, nose tilting, body already halfway to a run before his brain finished the scent. He reached her in seconds, a dark, joyful impact against her knees. May laughed and cried at the same time, hands burying themselves in his fur, face pressing briefly to the broad curve of his head. "You did it," she whispered into his ear. "You got him home." When she lifted her gaze, August was standing at the fence, watching. He looked different and exactly the same. Larger, somehow, not just in flesh but in presence. His eyes, still the same deep wells, had changed their weather. Less storm, more depth. May walked toward him slowly. Each step measured the way she'd learned to move around large hearts in fragile bodies. She stopped a respectful distance from the fence. Let him study her. Let herself be studied. "Hey there, August," she said, voice thick. "You remember the scrappy little patch of dirt you washed up on?" He reached his trunk through the rails, the tip hovering just short of her outstretched hand. Warm air brushed her skin. She didn't push. She let the space hang. Then he closed it. The trunk touched her palm, rough and fine at once. The same texture she'd felt that first morning when she'd lifted water to his lips. For a heartbeat, they stood like that, woman and elephant, joined by one small bridge of skin and trust. Diesel threaded himself between them, leaning his weight lightly against the fence, looking like he belonged to both worlds now. The sanctuary staff gave them time. No one posed them for photos. No one asked May to cry on camera. The story had already been told for strangers. This part was for them. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the sky in bruised oranges and golds, Rosa suggested a walk to the pond. August did not need the target stick anymore. He knew the way. They moved as a procession. August in front, May and Rosa in the middle, Diesel ranging between, the other elephants watching from their fields. The path was packed earth and soft mud in places, worn by heavy feet and patient days. At the water's edge, August paused. The surface reflected the sky, his face, the distant line of trees. He stepped in, the pond accepting his weight with a small, pleased wave. Diesel followed to the muddy bank, stopping where his reflection trembled at the edge. August filled his trunk and lifted it high. For a moment it hovered, water dripping in slow beads. Then he turned, just slightly, and let the water fall, not onto himself, but out in an arc that caught both Diesel and May in its reach. Cold drops struck May's arms, her shirt, her hair. She gasped, then laughed, the sound surprising even her. Diesel shook violently, sending a second shower outward, his tail beating the air. Around them, the sanctuary settled into evening. Crickets tuned their instruments. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the smell of wet earth and clean skin. Somewhere, another elephant answered with a low rumble that seemed to come up from the ground itself. May wiped water from her face and looked at the two of them. One who had been bred to guard, one who had been bred to perform, both doing something entirely else. What had happened after that night in her pasture could have been another chain, another cage, another quiet disappearing. Instead, it was this: a giant who had learned to stand without fear, a dog who had found a purpose larger than a property line, a woman whose empty farm had sent her heart somewhere it could be useful again. The world would remember the viral clip, the dog stopping the elephant, the kneeling, the shock. But out here, under a Texas sky bigger than any screen, the true surprise was simpler and more enduring. Healing did not arrive all at once. It arrived in small, persistent rituals: a trunk lifted, a paw placed, a gate opened, a pond entered, over and over, until the past became something that lived in scars instead of in every breath. As the last light slid off the water, August lowered his trunk and drew in one more lungful of the cool, dusk-scented air. Diesel settled at the pond's edge. May, hands damp and heart steady, stood between them. No one spoke. No one needed to. The love that had grown here did what it always did best. It filled the silence and needed no words at all.